What are these 50 days? Why did Trump give Putin 50 days? Or maybe he didn't give them to Putin. Hatred clouds the mind in general. When you hate, it's hard, I'd even say almost impossible to think, let alone analyze. But the world isn't two-dimensional. It's not two-dimensional. Yes, gentlemen, I'll tell you why and for what reason 50 days. Because the nonsense pouring out of the television sets, both in Russian and in English and in Ukrainian, is staggering in its stupidity. Yes, an interesting observation, by the way. If you see under my videos, suddenly among hundreds of very positive comments, a few nasty or shocking remarks in a row with outrageous accusations, just know that the video caused concern either among Russian or Ukrainian bots, or rather, not even the bots themselves, but their management, and a stream of hastily prepared fake comments started pouring in. Don't be surprised and don't get upset. It's like an order, like a Medal of Honor, if such things exist. There's a badge, a mark of honor, yes, so that's 50 days. What are the goals of the United States when imposing secondary sanctions? It's simple. If you, whether a country or a company, buy something from the Russians that allows them to continue financing the war, then you'll have to make a choice. Trade with Russia and forget about trading with the biggest market in the world, the United States, or trade with the United States but forget about Russia. So basically choose whose side you're on. And by the way, it's possible that the European Union might also join in, including, say, Britain, and maybe a couple of other countries as well. I think this will be announced as a general sanction or action, call it whatever you like. Oil purchases, ladies and gentlemen, can't be stopped instantly. First of all, tankers are on their way. Secondly, something has already been paid for. Thirdly, fourthly, fifthly, something has been chartered. The goods that have already been purchased need to be delivered, payments need to be settled, and new suppliers must be found for millions of barrels of oil and billions of cubic meters of gas. It's not that simple. The fleet needs to be reoriented, and sometimes preparations must be made to receive energy resources that are different from what we're used to. And where they're received, people need to learn how to receive them. They need to know how to handle them. Although I'm sure the White House has already held talks and is negotiating with India, possibly with Brazil as well, although we're having a bit of a mess with Brazil right now, but anything is possible. That this has already been discussed with them, and a package of proposals has been prepared. Countries that buy from Russia have to make a difficult decision that will lead to long-term consequences. Why hasn't Trump, for example, signed trade agreements with 30 or 50 countries yet? Theoretically, we have 200 counterparties. He has only signed with 2. Because it's very difficult. You have to think everything through. You have to check how certain decisions will affect different industries, working professionals, other projects, and, by the way, relationships with other countries. 50 days is incredibly little, but a decision must be made before preparations for the cold season begin. Why else do we need 50 days? To bring Ukraine to combat readiness. Air defense deliveries will start as early as tomorrow. Some Patriots from Europe are coming, but the exact number is being determined due to a misunderstanding that caused confusion. Maybe it's about Trump, what he's saying, or maybe it's about others, what Trump said. Missiles from Germany, armored vehicles from NATO countries. The list is compiled taking into account the needs of Ukraine, Poland, NATO, and the production capabilities in the United States of America. But the United States is turning not into a participant in the war, but into a supplier, and a supplier to the one who was attacked. We, the United States, are trying to stop the war with diplomacy. Now, for 50 days, we will try to stop it with the threat of a big hammer, which we can use to hit the Kremlin and other heads as well. After 50 days, it is possible to extend this period if India and Brazil, for example, ask for more time. If we see that it didn't work, we will give Ukraine, well, let's say an axe, and along with it, a hammer and a saw. The British raised the alarm, by the way, for another reason as well.
But there's one more thing I noticed. You did an amazing interview with a Ukrainian soldier who was suffering from the effects of chemical weapons, which, as you said, the Russians were dropping on his positions, you know? And it seems there are more and more reports that the Russians are dropping banned chemical weapons. Now, irritant substances are being used, intended to smoke the Ukrainians out of their defensive positions into open areas where they can be attacked either by artillery or drones. Could you tell us how common this is, what you learned from talking to them, and what Ukraine can do to protect itself from this?
Yes, I first covered this topic back in 2024. For this, I conducted an investigation during which we managed to seize Russian chemical weapons from the front line. It was a tear gas grenade. They usually use either irritants or agents that cause temporary incapacitation. The two main substances they use are chlorobenzylidine, malononitrile gas, which is classified as a riot control agent but is banned for use in wartime under the Chemical Weapons Convention. They also use chloropicrin, which is an agent for temporary incapacitation. It is too dangerous to be used as a riot control agent. No one uses it for riot control. It can actually kill a person. If you stay in an enclosed space filled with chloropicrin, yes, you will almost certainly die.
That was it. I already told you about it.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is currently in China, where he is participating in a meeting with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and also trying to strengthen China-Russia relations. And what we are witnessing now is truly amazing. We see that despite Vladimir Putin's years-long dreams of a multipolar world, the only thing he has achieved is turning Russia into a client state of China. And although Lavrov shook hands with the Chinese leader Xi Jinping, and the meeting seemed very warm, the Chinese leader smiled in response and said pleasant words. At the same time, the Chinese were doing something completely different. They were stealing Russian hypersonic technologies. They were securing long-term energy dominance across Central Asia and moving forward with a lunar-based project that excludes Moscow. So that friendly handshake between Xi and Lavrov was less about diplomacy and more about capitulation. The question isn't whether China will turn against Russia, but when it will happen.
There was an interesting conversation on the channel with the United States ambassador to NATO, Matt Whitaker.
So we're going to do this together with NATO, and everything is fully approved, fully decided. And we will send them a lot of weapons of all kinds, and they will immediately deliver these weapons to the battlefield, to different areas of the war.
And starting with Patriot systems, which may begin arriving as early as today, and they are really necessary because the Russians have found a way to set up mass production of these drones. And they attack residential buildings and schools, not just military targets. We are joined by someone who knows this situation very well, the United States ambassador to NATO, Matt Whitaker. Matt, welcome. It was nice talking to you. I know you received a warning. The president will make an important statement on Monday. How would you describe him?
Well, Brian, first of all, it's a real pleasure to be with you, and I'm glad to see you this morning. Also, on the program, it's always a pleasure to discuss this, and I know you follow this issue very closely. You know, I think the president obviously wanted to create conditions for establishing peace. He's a peacemaker. You know, we can list all the peace agreements, whether it's the end of the 12-day war, the peace agreement in Congo, or the upcoming agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Wherever you look, President Trump and his team are trying to negotiate peace. But he is very disappointed, and he has spoken about this publicly, that Vladimir Putin is not ready to come to the negotiating table and really take a serious approach to resolving this conflict. You know, the Russians have made virtually no progress on the battlefield in Ukraine while, the slaughter continues and the Russians are losing thousands of lives every week. And at the same time, there is nothing strategic about striking residential buildings, children's hospitals, and similar targets that you see on the battlefield every day. The attacks are not on the battlefield, but in cities like Kyiv and Odessa. They aim to spread fear and chaos, just to, harass, disrupt Ukrainians, and maybe try to break their will. But they keep fighting, and I think President Trump acknowledges all of this, and he's looking for a way to establish peace. And I think that strengthening Ukraine might eventually create leverage to establish peace in this conflict.
India, Pakistan, Congo, Rwanda, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and the United States are working all over the world, trying to teach eternally feuding savages how to solve problems without hitting each other over the head with a rock. The list could go on, but the thorn in the emerging peaceful relations, in the peace negotiations, so to speak, at the moment is Russia, the Kremlin, which is personified by Putin.
After all, no matter how strong an air defense system is, it can always be overloaded. All you need to do is send more and more drones and more missiles. That's why Trump is tackling the root of this problem, the Russian military treasury. You see, probably everyone knows that Putin was preparing for this war. He accumulated a lot of dollar reserves, he saved a lot of money from his oil revenues to prepare for the invasion of Ukraine. But he didn't expect it to drag on for so long. Nevertheless, he managed to finance this war with the help of his shadow fleet.
Over the past 3 years, Putin has tripled the military budget, significantly increasing spending. And actually, that's quite an interesting correlation. We don't know the exact numbers because we can't be sure what to believe when it comes to Russia. But the official figure for last year is that Russia received about $110 billion from oil. And that's roughly equivalent to how much it spends on its army. So it could be from 100 to 150, but basically what they spend on their army is almost equal to what they get from oil. That is, this is their foundation. This is their most important economic weapon, oil. So far,
until now, the sanctions have not really been aimed at the sale of Russian oil the way we are doing it now. And the reason for this is twofold. First of all, of course, no United States president wants the price of oil to rise. And that's exactly why they weren't ready to impose such sanctions on Russian oil that would completely remove it from the market. Of course, it's impossible to do this 100%, but you can get as close as possible to removing it from the market. But if you do that, Russia is one of the largest oil suppliers in the world. That means oil prices will skyrocket and American consumers will suffer. That's why in 2022 we tried the so-called price cap. Basically, it meant that Russia could sell its oil, but couldn't sell it for more than $60 a barrel. And how did we enforce this price cap? With the help of Western companies that handle the transportation and insurance of Russian oil? You see, the West has actually monopolized the market for oil tankers and the insurance companies that insure those tankers. Thus, the sanctions actually required any company working with Russian oil companies to make sure that the oil on their tanker, the oil they insure, is sold only at a price below $60 per barrel. If they didn't have documents confirming this, a Western company couldn't transport that oil, and a Western company couldn't insure that tanker. To get around this restriction, Russia bought up a lot of shadow tankers. This was the so-called shadow fleet. Using shell companies and offshore accounts, Russia acquired many old tankers and began using them to transport oil to countries like Turkey, India, and China. Everyone knew this was happening, but no one wanted to fight it, because it would cause major problems in the oil market and, of course, inflation. But now inflation is going down, and oil prices are also falling. This means that the United States president has more opportunity to put pressure on Russian oil sales. Because even if prices go up, they won't rise enough to become a problem for American consumers.
So the blow to Russia is planned not only through arms supplies, but also by tracking and disabling Russia's shadow tankers. And see, this is a refusal, well, let's put it this way, an attempt to force buyers like India not to purchase Russian energy resources. This will immediately reduce Russia's revenues. Naturally, both Russia and the United States are frantically negotiating with India, since India is the most likely candidate to change its supplier. Especially after China's involvement in Pakistan's attack on India alongside the Russia-Iran-China bloc, India has plenty of reasons to fall out. Brazil will most likely decide to go into China's embrace. The hunt for Russian illegal tankers will be what Ukraine uses to push Putin toward ending military actions.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said he has no doubt that Russia will cope with any new sanctions. Russia. What he really meant to say is that he wants to understand what prompted President Trump to issue this new 50-day ultimatum, as he put it. Dmitry Peskov, the Kremlin's press secretary and Vladimir Putin's spokesperson, said that new sanctions or tariffs would only hinder peace negotiations. He said that Kyiv will perceive the decisions made in Washington and by NATO countries as a signal to continue the war, not pursue peace. However, they are paying attention to this. At the same time, he called the latest events quite serious and noted that they need to analyze Trump's motives.
Russia said it wants to analyze the motives behind Trump's actions. The idea that someone might simply want to stop the killing and destruction doesn't occur to either Lavrov or Putin. Let's try to figure out in detail what exactly we, America, are offering to Ukraine and the Europeans.
The United States is planning to sell nearly $10 billion worth of weapons to NATO allies who are supplying Ukraine. From Patriot systems to artillery, American equipment will be delivered through Europe to Ukrainian frontline positions. These are the Europeans, this is NATO, and the G7 and $10 billion. This is a lot of weapons, guys.
I often talk to him about ending all this, and I always hang up thinking, well, that was a pleasant conversation. And then missiles are launched at Kiev or some other city, and I say, that's strange. And when this happens 3 or 4 times, you realize that conversations mean nothing. My conversations with him are always very pleasant. I say, isn't this a very pleasant conversation? And then that same night, they launch rockets. I come home and tell the First Lady, you know, today I talked to Vladimir, we had a wonderful conversation. She says, really? They just hit another city. So it's kind of like, look at him. I don't want to say he's a killer, but he's a tough guy. That has been proven over the years. He deceived a lot of people. He deceived Bush. He deceived a lot of people. He deceived Clinton, Bush, Obama, Biden. He didn't deceive me.
He, Putin, didn't fool me, said Trump. Donald also mentioned his Serbian wife, Melania.
The most interesting detail is what Trump says when he talked to Putin on the phone. He then told his wife Milana that he had a good conversation, and Milana replied, really? Another city in Ukraine has just been hit. Whether this really happened or Donald Trump made it up, we don't know. Milana.
Trump was born
In the former Yugoslavia, more precisely, in modern Slovenia, and we actually don't know what Melania's political views are. She has never publicly supported Ukraine or condemned the Russians, but it became a meme. People really liked hearing that maybe Melania Trump privately advocated for Ukraine to Donald Trump. So the internet is already blowing this up. I had a great conversation with Putin, actually. Another Ukrainian city has just been hit. Now, people are creating images of Melania Trump in blue and yellow colors to show that she supports Ukraine. And it's just an amazing image.
Naturally, this wasn't very well received in Russia.
There's no denying that the female factor has always played a huge role in diplomacy. In this case, we should pay attention to the role that Slovenia, as a member of the European Union, plays in United States politics. After all, to continue this well-known saying, Melania is the neck that determines which way the head of the United States of America will turn. Does Melania Trump control anything that Donald Trump does? And no, she does not control him.
Kicking Trump is the main task of Kremlinologists today. She twists them around her finger as she pleases. Of course, in the mouths of Russians, this is an incredible insult.
According to reports, Trump asked Zelensky if Ukraine could strike Moscow. The White House stated that he did not incite further bloodshed. I believe that this conversation really took place. Donald Trump and Zelensky spoke on the phone, and Trump asked Zelensky, "Are you capable of bombing Moscow? The Russians bomb your capital every night. Can you bomb them?" And yes, Ukraine has long-range drones, and they have already struck Moscow, but they do not have ballistic or cruise missiles. Which led Trump to the idea, why don't we sell Ukraine ballistic and cruise missiles? So one of the first weapons that Ukraine may receive in the near future will be additional Army Tactical Missile System missiles. If the Europeans are ready to pay for them, then, reportedly, Donald Trump is ready to provide them. We're talking about approximately 18 additional Army Tactical Missile System missiles. Ukraine will not refuse them. But here is the main point that Donald Trump may approve, while Joe Biden was never ready for this. The next weapon for Ukraine could be an American missile, and it may arrive just in time. Air-to-ground missile 158 Jazz is the American counterpart to the Storm Shadow, or Skull. This is an air-launched cruise missile fired from F-16 fighter jets. Now, Ukraine has F-16 fighter jets in service. Will they be provided? Judging by their range, they can't reach the capital, Moscow, but they get pretty close. All these Russian air bases and ammunition depots are within range. And yes, I think that, following the trajectory we're on right now, Donald Trump is going to approve and sell to Ukraine. This is a significant victory, guys. It will greatly impact the battlefield.
Oh. Everyone is saying now. What kind of creature is this that Ukrainians and supporters of Ukraine in the United States are so happy about? JSSMER. This modification flies for 1,000 kilometers. The original, I think, flew 300 or 400 kilometers. Regarding the Patriot systems, Trump apparently misspoke when he said that we would deliver 17 systems, and very soon the United States might deliver 17 missiles soon, and the systems within a year. A few from Europe and the United States. The system means the launcher, so it's all together. The United States Department of Defense has already said that it seems to have been a slip of the tongue, but according to journalist profiles, they should reach out to the White House for clarification, simply because they don't know exactly what Donald J. Trump, the president, meant. In response to Trump's ultimatum, as we know, Putin and Lavrov said that they are not afraid and will not back down. Putin told Trump that in 50 days he would occupy all of eastern Ukraine. What is the real situation now before Ukraine receives all these weapons? And what actually could change at the moment when these weapons arrive?
We're already halfway through the summer. The summer is already halfway over, and Russia's major summer offensive in Sumy has failed. And the second attack, let's see. Yes, they're attacking right here, in Kharkiv, and they're not succeeding there either. There is no chance that in 50 days the Russians will take Pokrovsk or Konstantinovka or the city of Zaporizhia or Sloviansk or Kramatorsk. The map hasn't changed much in the last 6 months, and it won't change much in the next 2 months either. Putin's negotiator is calling for constructive dialogue, while Trump is changing his position on Ukraine. This is Kirill Dmitriev. He's kind of a third-tier negotiator that Russia sent to Istanbul to meet with the Ukrainians. Lavrov didn't even go, and here's what he published 2 days ago. A constructive dialogue between Russia and the United States will always achieve more than the tired, destructive language of pressure. Only cooperation brings real peace, stability, and global security. Biden's mistakes and deception will be corrected. The world deserves a greater handshake. A globe, the Russian flag, the American flag. This was 2 days ago. We need a constructive dialogue. We need to reduce the level of tension. And the next day he published this. People who follow Biden's false narratives and approaches are leading the world to winter. He is talking about nuclear war. Then he posted a Game of Thrones montage with the caption, "Winter is coming, period." That is, the day before. We need constructive dialogue. Next day. We threaten to start a nuclear war with the whole world and create an eternal winter. Let's listen to what Peskov answered. Here is what Peskov said in response to Trump's statement. I will tell you the following regarding Trump's statement yesterday. The statement by the President of the United States is very serious. Some parts of it were addressed personally
to President Putin.
We definitely need time to analyze what was said
in Washington.
And if and when President Putin deems it necessary, he will definitely comment on it. I wouldn't comment on this ahead of time, so let's wait for Putin's decision. He will comment on it himself. Period.
Bye.
We can only say for sure. It seems that such a decision, made in Washington, in NATO countries, and directly in Brussels, is perceived by the Ukrainian side not as a signal for peace, but as a signal to continue the war. Period. I want to emphasize once again that we have repeatedly stated at various levels, including the highest, that we are waiting for proposals. And so Russians don't know how to react.
In general, it's wonderful. Russia started the war. Russia invaded, bombs, kills, destroys, and waits for Ukraine to propose how to end the war. At the same time, it has already written into its constitution that part of Ukraine is now Russia. Iron logic.
Donald Trump gave them a 50-day deadline. Donald Trump gave them a 50-day deadline. So if they start to panic and attack Trump, he can always say, now we're imposing sanctions, period. But Donald Trump still approved $10 billion in military aid to Ukraine, even if the United States isn't paying for it. So the Russians are very puzzled. Here's what Alexander Dugin says. Make America Great Again should declare, give us back our Donald Trump. Release our president from captivity immediately. Let the president go.
I think I actually understand what's going on. Russians have convinced themselves that Trump is ready to give them Ukraine in exchange for friendship with Russia. After all, when Trump talked to Putin, he discussed not only Ukraine with him, but the whole world as a partner. They talked about Iran, about China, the situation in India and Pakistan. Well, he behaved with him like a partner, but with Zelensky, he didn't act like a partner. He imposed tariffs on all countries, let's say, but not on Russia. He criticized Ukraine, but not Russia. He yelled at Zelensky, called him names, insulted him, but spoke about Putin with utmost respect. So, a prominent Make America Great Again figure, let's say Tucker Carlson, just became buddies with Putin and all the others. Trump's first political mentor, Steve Bannon, demanded an end to aid for Ukraine and Make America Great Again as a political movement in general. claims that America is what we care about. And the affairs of other countries, especially if they're on other continents, are not our concern at all. That's why Russians were sure that Trump wouldn't provide aid to Ukraine, that he would demand an end to the war but wouldn't get involved. In fact, Putin explained to Trump in their last conversation that he needed 50 to 60 days to throw all his forces into the battle and capture the 4 regions that Russia has incorporated into its territory. And after that, Russia would be ready to stop, sit down for negotiations, divide Ukraine, and begin restoring diplomatic and trade relations with Europe and the rest of the world. That is, from the point of view of Dugov, Peskov, Lavrov, and Putin, everything was going well and moving toward the end of this years-long bloody conflict. And then suddenly a complete setback. A total reversal of Washington's policy, threats to oil buyers, billions in weapons supplied to Ukraine, and a complete abandonment of what seemed to be a clear policy. Who made a mistake? Who miscalculated? Maybe Trump thought that Putin would stop the war and be satisfied with what he had captured. Maybe Putin thought that Trump understood that after the Constitution was changed, Putin couldn't help but take these regions, and that Trump was playing along with him. But someone, or maybe all of them, didn't understand anything about each other. That's what led to Lavrov's bewilderment. We need to figure out the reasons why Trump changed his policy. The reasons. They don't understand the dynamics. It was going, and then it changed. It wasn't going differently before. Trump didn't change anything. He said, even before January 20th, before taking office, he said, if Ukraine interferes with the movement toward peace, we will punish it. And if Russia does, then we will punish it. The thing is, sometimes there's just incompatibility, like boom, boom, you just pass by each other. Yeah, I don't even know how to explain it. Take Putin, for example. He's a former KGB agent who became a politician. For many years now, having that KGB background has been essentially the same as being a politician. The only difference is that politicians usually don't use force. They step aside and let others do it, and then they come back again. So Putin, like any other politician, always keeps a backup plan in mind. Trump, a businessman, never truly became a politician despite serving as president for 4 years. The thing is, his knowledge and skills in business came in handy and transferred over to negotiations with. Previously, he dealt with corporate CEOs and now with country leaders. To him, there's virtually no difference. And actually, really, it's just that the culture of communication is different. Some people think you have to lie all the time, and they lie themselves. They are always trying to read between the lines. Back in the Soviet Union, we eagerly watched movies and anticipated the release of new books that everyone would read. It means that the true meaning lies between the lines, not exactly what is written, but something in between that you have to understand. And the other Trump and the other side believe that in big business you can bluff, you can play dumb, you can pretend to be crazy so that people are afraid, but you can't lie. Because it's not the paper, not the ink, not even the stamp, but the word of the leader. And that's the best and most important commitment. That is, both of them, Putin and Trump, looked at each other and didn't really see each other. And the whole American team was looking at the Russians, and the Russian team was looking at the Americans. They thought, well, everything is clear, but actually they didn't understand anything. Or rather, they saw what they thought they were supposed to see. The United States offered Russia a very good way out of a stupid war, especially for Russia.
It was a very advantageous offer that Trump had been making to Putin for the last 6 months. You can keep all the territories you have captured. The United States will recognize Crimea as internationally belonging to you. We will lift all sanctions and put pressure on Europe to also lift all sanctions on Russia. All frozen assets will be returned. And the only thing the Russians have to do is stop killing people, stop trying to seize new lands. And Putin said no to Trump. Putin said,
No to Trump. I want more territory. I need another 50 or 60 days. I'll push until I reach the borders where I want to be. What happened will give a huge boost to Ukraine's enthusiasm and will hit the Russians, who will start to feel what it's like to have modern weapons turned against them. Honestly, I have conflicting feelings. On one hand, I want the slaughter to end. And I think a lot of soldiers' mothers on both sides, well, let's say on the Ukrainian side, are ready to give up eastern Ukraine just so their children can come home, and if possible, not crippled. On the other hand, deep down, I'm somewhat glad that Russia refused. And they'll get hit back so that bombs and missiles will start exploding in Russia, so that Russians understand that their joy from attacking their neighbor can turn into tears from his response. That's why maybe it's actually good that Putin didn't agree to peace, and that it didn't just end with dividing up territory, parades, and celebrations in Moscow, and the joyful howling about the invincible Russian world, the Russian world. The Russian world, as it looks now, is disgusting. It stinks. It causes nausea, contempt, and revulsion. Nothing else. Well, maybe there's some other feeling that I've already forgotten. And even though I don't wish harm on anyone, somewhere deep inside me, I would like Russia to live for 3.5 years under the same conditions that Ukraine has lived in. For the 3.5 years that Russia brought upon her, upon Ukraine, and then 3.5 years in return. And let them sort it out themselves after that. That will be their concern then. It's actually their business even now, but then it will really be only their business. Subtitles created by me.